QALYfied, Episode 1, To Quarantine and Back. A quick note from Augustus here. In the podcast, we throw around the terms quali and dolly rather casually, and sometimes stray away from the absolute definitions. So I wanted to just add a definition and a clarification here if you haven't encountered these terms before. QALY, spelled QALY, is an acronym for Quality Adjusted Life Year, which is a measure of the quality and quantity of life lived. A QALY of 1 is living with perfect health, and a QALY of 0 is death. DALY, spelled DALY, stands for Disability Adjusted Life Year, which is a measure of disease burden. DALY is calculated by the years of life lost and the years lived with disability. That's about it. Once again, in the heat of the discussion, we might use the terms loosely and broadly, but rest assured, we do know what they mean. And now, you do too. So on with the show.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to Singapore.
Yes, it's great to be back.
So we haven't spoken in, I think, a couple of weeks now.
Yeah, that's right. I was busy doing a move from San Francisco back to Singapore, so I was kind of busy during that time period.
For sure. So tell me, what was it like? What was it like traveling during a pandemic, internationally, especially? What was it like?
It's kind of funny because in some ways it's less stressful than usual.
Wow.
The airports are pretty much completely empty for the most part.
Really?
I mean, yeah. So my journey was San Francisco, transit in LA, Singapore, right? So from San Francisco to LA, those are usually very, very busy airports, right?
Yeah.
I mean, lots of flights. But when I went, pretty much, I walked through security. I walked through, there was basically nothing there. You get in, and that, there's always a central area where there's lots of food.
Yeah.
That's basically, that's usually the busiest part of the airport, right? You just got people just standing in lines, whatever. Nobody.
Empty.
Literally, it's a ghost town.
Did you get your brains tickled a bit with the swabs?
Oh, I only actually did that yesterday. Was it yesterday? No, Wednesday.
Oh, really?
So 2 days ago. Yeah.
Okay, so describe the walkthrough from the time the airport. What was it like? What was the plane ride like? Anything unusual happened in terms of the process?
Nothing unusual. Except that everybody is obligated to wear masks, and I say obligated because even though it is technically, they blare on the PR system saying, everybody please wear masks. Everybody's being constantly reminded, but it's not really policed, so to speak.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny because there's a really big difference between domestic and international terminal. So when I was in LA, I arrived domestic because I was flying from San Francisco, and then I had to walk to international, which is where my Singapore flight was going to leave from.
Right.
Domestic terminal, really empty. You see all these people mingling around, and they're wearing masks, but very casually, I would say.
What's a casual wearing of mask?
So it's it's
face?
not quite. So a lot of them is some of them are just wearing gaiters, or basically bandanas, because the rule is you need to have you need some face covering. It doesn't actually mandate a certain kind of mask, right? Or a certain kind of material.
Right.
So you see people who are just wearing bandanas. A lot of them take them down or take them off every time they are sort of whenever. So I saw one lady who literally, she was walking around in a mask, sat down, and then pulled out her phone and started having a conversation with somebody. But when she pulled out her phone, she pulled down her mask to start talking.
Oh.
And she was on the call for 30 minutes, right? So it's okay, that's, and you see people who they basically start, they bought a coffee or whatever, so they start drinking the coffee, and that's fine. so
Yeah.
they don't have the mask down.
Yeah.
And then they forget, they don't put it back on again.
Oh,
basically.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So I would say it's like a more casual attitude to masks in the domestic terminals. And of course, this is not everyone. There are definitely people who are, properly wearing masks the entire time. But you notice that kind of behavior in the domestic terminals.
And are people not saying anything? Are the people around them not saying anything? Because in Singapore, I mean, if I went down to the ground floor, or I mean, I guess in the corridor in front of my house, probably no one's gonna police me. But once I get onto the ground floor and you've got people walking by, people are going to make a face and look at you kind of strangely. So
no, this is the United States. Personal choice is a big thing, and I think it's been so politicized that if you try to police somebody, you end up with a fight about whether Trump is right or not, I think.
Oh God.
So it's not the most organized, and I would say, like, again, it's not everybody, but it's definitely noticeable that people are not following the rules.
So would you say like 30%, 20%, 50% of people are kind of lackadaisical?
I would say probably about 20% are lackadaisical about it, and maybe like 5% are the ones that are like persistently yes, exactly, like staunchly against it
being masked.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of the thing, which is, when I was living in San Francisco, walking around, that's probably the proportion. Most people do try to wear masks. A lot of people are still trying to stay home as much as possible. But there is definitely a distinct population who just don't give about it anymore, and they choose not to wear masks. So domestic terminal, empty. So actually, in some ways, it's easier to avoid these people because you have the entire terminal. You just walk somewhere else where they're not there. Right? So you can avoid them because it's empty. And then, but when you go to international terminal, that was actually, relatively speaking, busy. LA airport is one of the busiest international airports, I think, in the United States. So usually it is very crowded usually. So I would say it's less than usual, but surprising numbers of people. There's still like lines of people checking in, people sitting on pretty much every chair, at least in the check-in sort of lounge area before they go into the into the departure terminal. So still relatively busy, but everybody is, I would say most people, if not everybody in that terminal, is diligent. And unfortunately, you see a pretty big divide. It's like domestic terminal, mostly, it's like a mix of people, but mostly non-Asian. You walk into international terminal, at least the place where I was going, obviously, these are the flights going to Asia. So it's mostly Asian people. And everybody is masked up. It's at minimum surgical mask. Most people are wearing N95 masks. And some people are not only wearing the mask, they're wearing face shields. And some people have gone to the next step of getting, so they're wearing an N95 mask plus a face shield. And then there are people who are doing that and basically wearing a full body PPE as well.
I'm
so
sorry,
it's
like a
the white
suit?
bodysuit, like the hazmat kind of suit.
How many people are wearing a hazmat PPE bodysuit? I have to
maybe
know.
1%. Maybe
1%.
about 1%.
So you saw at least one person. You saw one person at least.
No, I saw maybe like 5 or 6 people.
Wow.
But there was at least 500 to 600 people probably in the international.
How do you know they were traveling? They weren't working there.
Well, they aren't dressed like staff, and most of them had luggage, so they're traveling.
Okay. And what about on the flight? Was it crowded? What was the person sitting next to you dressed up like? I guess.
Well, I guess I'm gonna be slightly skewed because I was traveling business class. So, but I do know that they were trying to space out people on the flight.
They were. Okay.
Yeah. It wasn't a full flight anyway. So there was definitely room to be spaced out.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And the people in business class, what were they wearing? I mean, what were they like? Were they dressed up? Were they
No, not. I think quite standard, and I actually was quite annoyed because, unfortunately, I saw a trend.
Yeah.
It's hard to, obviously I've only done 2 flights,
Right.
not a dozen, so it's not representative.
Sure.
But white men, they're the ones who seem to be the least compliant.
Really?
White men of a certain age seem to be
shit.
the least compliant with wearing a mask.
So they're just lounging around business class without a mask on?
Yes, that's right.
Oh, okay.
And even when you tell them, they basically took every opportunity to take down the mask when you weren't looking, right? And it's like a 16-hour something flight.
Yeah.
And most of it is in the dark because they turned out the lights. You're supposed to be sleeping, so there's no way for you personally to police this. So once you realize that this is the case, you just spend your own time trying to be diligent with yourself because you can't control them. Right.
So you had your mask on the whole time, like
yeah, pretty much.
And were there I can't remember, are there still meals being served? Is there still attendance going about? Can you use the bathroom? All those little things.
So you can use the bathroom. There are meals served, and for me, I tried to eat as little as possible. So I had a big meal before I got on the long flight.
I see.
So I didn't eat the first meal.
Sure.
But it is a 16-hour flight, so I did get hungry at some point. And my entire plan was basically to avoid eating when other people were eating.
Sure.
Right? Because the idea is that if other people are masked up while I'm eating, if I'm infected, they're less likely to catch it. Okay. And if nobody else is eating at the same time that I'm eating, they're not going to be, giving off all the droplets if they are masked up. So I basically ate off schedule, one meal. And when I was eating, I wore a face shield for at least trying to prevent as much of my water droplets getting into the atmosphere.
Yeah. So it sounds like you, I guess from the way you're describing your behavior, it sounds like you're still fairly concerned about these people around you, I guess, being potential spreaders to the point where you're actually trying to protect yourself. So I was just wondering about that, because in Singapore, I don't really feel that that's how we think about it necessarily. I really do think that people are wearing it because we have to wear it. We're not really conscious that I'm protecting myself from other people, because once you get into a restaurant, all the masks come off and it's the same thing. So like, you've just been standing with these 10 people outside the restaurant, protected against them, and then you go into the restaurant and it's the same thing.
Yeah. So it's all about viral load for me, right? So if you live in an environment which mostly has closed borders, right? The case is low. So I think the cases are in the low double digits, if not the single digits in Singapore per day, right? What that means is that, and you have a population of close to 7 million, something like that?
Yeah, 7 million.
You calculate your probability, right? The likelihood of you getting it from somebody, even if, you say 10 people are infected, so potentially there's 80 that is asymptomatic, that's 100 people in 7 million. What's your likelihood, especially if there's contact tracing where, you go around and you pick up all those asymptomatic ones as well.
Right.
So in some ways, like, I understand why there is less concern in this population that you might actually be infected by sitting with somebody.
Yeah.
But in environments where there is very, let's say, much poorer control over the caseload, then you have to make some assumptions, right? Especially in environments like airports, where you're bringing very diverse crowd together.
Right.
So when you do that, your chances of mixing with somebody else is who has the disease is much higher, because the thing about humans is, like, we tend to hang out with other people like us. So if I am risk intolerant for this disease, the likelihood is, even if I meet somebody else, I would pick who I meet to be also risk intolerant.
Right.
So I choose who I'm having dinner with in
Right.
a certain setting.
Right.
But places like airports, you don't get to choose. It's whoever comes, and that's why the risks are much higher.
Right.
So for me, I definitely thought it was worthwhile making the effort to try to prevent, myself from infecting anybody else if I still happen to have it, and also to protect myself from other people.
I see. So I think it's interesting because I had a bit of an experience in the past couple of weeks. So I had a couple of days where I wasn't working and decided I would go to the theater, the cinema, to watch Tenet, and I thought I thought it would be responsible to go during the daytime when I knew it would be less crowded. And to be honest, when I went to the cinema, I didn't. Okay, so the strategies that people have exhibited, I'm not saying that I did it, but some people do is they bring a snack and a drink, and that's an excuse to take your mask down. But it was a very large theater, and I think it's basically I don't know, an IMAX theater, but there were only maybe about 10 people. We were very spaced out. But even then, I didn't really I didn't have a drink, and so I had my mask on the whole time. Which was fine. And then we went to eat and all kinds of things. And I would say that the place that we went to was not crowded. Obviously, it was a weekday, but there were a couple of people around. And a couple of days after, when I checked in with the Safe Entry contact tracing app, there was a notification that said that you had been to a place. In fact, you've been to a few places where someone had been infected with COVID-19. So one thing was that we'd gone to a restaurant and was at the same time, roughly maybe about 30 minutes to an hour, the same time as this other person, and we were in the shopping mall at the same time as this other person, and I was even in a second shopping mall with the same time as this other person on the same day. So firstly, I was worried, like, am I the person? Are they saying I'm the person? But so that was the one thing, and then the second was like, okay, obviously I'm not the person, because like that's completely illogical. But then I was waiting for someone to contact me, for someone to tell me I need to be swabbed, that my house needs to be in lockdown, and someone's gonna come in and put me in a COVID camp or something like that. But the weird thing was that my friend who I had gone with, he did not have a notification, and in the next couple of days to up to 2 weeks, no one had contacted me about being tracked. But it actually did really freak me out. It really freaked me out, and I think the idea that I could have been exposed in a restaurant where your masks are off and other people are around you, and it wasn't a large restaurant, that kind of freaked me out for a couple of weeks after that, to the point where now I don't think I would go into a cinema again, to be honest. So
I mean, how to say, definitely one of your biggest risk factors, is eating, right, in a busy restaurant, because everybody is talking and it's just everywhere. But I think if you were wearing a mask the entire time, in a spaced out cinema, chances are you're probably okay. It's not perfect, obviously, but
scary.
It is less scary, for sure.
But so the restaurant was like, oh gosh.
Yeah, this is one of my problems at the moment, because I literally have not been in a retail setting in 8 months almost, right? And now I'm back in Singapore, and
you can.
I can, exactly.
And people are doing it.
I'm just like, and it's just one of those things where I'm like, I have a little bit of social anxiety, because I'm like, I haven't been out in public, and it's like, is this okay or not okay? Because it's a completely different environment now. I'm not sure if I'm ready to eat in a restaurant. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. I don't know. I haven't figured out my comfort level yet with that.
Gosh, yeah, I think the next couple of days, let alone a couple of weeks, will be interesting because I mean
Yeah.
it is a different environment. Like I think you can kind of say that probably it's a little bit less risky in a way, because of all the precautions that we're taking. So I think like even like what you mentioned previously, probably the risk in Singapore is quite low. It's just it's just a personal thing, right? It's like figuring out what you're comfortable with. Yeah, that will definitely be interesting. So you never got a swab. You didn't get a swab when you landed, or you did?
No. I mean, so the way Singapore has organized things is basically they say you don't need a test to get on the flight, but once you land, you're
Yeah.
obviously in quarantine for 2 weeks.
And do they shuttle you around? Are you in
They
a?
do.
Okay.
They do. It's like you're boxed in the entire way. You get into
Really?
a van with other people that were on your flight, and they take you direct to the hospital, to the hotel, and you get into a special lift that is just for
a special lift.
Yeah, it's not the main lift. It's like the back door lift, basically.
How do
you
they
go to your room.
How do they bring you all through immigration at the same time?
No, everybody walks through immigration like normal. It's not in a group setting. But once you come out on the other end, they're like, they count off like, okay, there's 5 of you now. Get onto this van. Take your luggage and go. So they have all the vans like lined up.
Okay.
So basically, no escape. You're shuttled all the way to the hotel. You're there for 2 weeks. Actually, it's 15 days, not actually 2 weeks. And then towards the end of your time period, so I think I did mine day, let me see, 10, day 11. Day 11.
Yeah.
They basically come and do a swab test, right?
So it's a nasal swab, to be clear.
Yeah, nasopharyngeal swab.
Okay.
Then a couple days later, they'll give you a call to say, positive or negative. If you're positive, you're gonna be stuck for much longer in the hotel because you're still quarantined.
Yeah.
But if you're negative, then you can leave on your 15-day mark, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
So I will be leaving Sunday.
Yay.
2 more days. Very happy.
And what has it been like in the hotel? I mean, what can you do? What's being provided to you? What's it like?
So they come with meals 3 times a day. So breakfast, lunch, dinner.
Do they put it through the door like a prison?
Kind of. There's like a little those luggage rack kind of things. They basically have that in front of your door. They put a tray on there. They put a tray down there. They ring the doorbell and they walk away.
Okay, fine. Okay, sure. Yeah.
And I would describe the meals as like, school lunch meals.
You don't pick your meals.
You don't pick your meals, so they just bring you whatever. You can say dietary requirements. So obviously, if you're vegetarian or whatever, you can say that.
Like I'm on the keto diet.
Not sure if they'll do keto.
I'm on the South Beach diet.
But yeah, so they bring you 3 meals a day, and I would describe the meals as perfectly edible, not entirely healthy, but usually not very exciting.
Okay.
Not very exciting.
So this is
so it's a lot
style.
of like, yeah, exactly. It is like school lunch, packed lunch, style.
Yeah.
So it's a lot like fried rice, fried noodles,
Ew.
That kind of thing.
So it's not restaurant food. It's not hotel food. It's not even hotel food. Oh no.
They outsource. Yeah, they outsource.
Oh no. Can you order hotel food?
You can order hotel food. That's on your own dime though.
I mean,
so
okay,
this is
fine. Yeah. But you can't get delivery.
You can.
You can. Oh, okay.
So you can get Deliveroo or Grab or whatever have you.
Okay. Okay. Well,
so
I guess
they
that's
just
not
leave it
so
at
bad.
reception, and then reception will send somebody up with it.
So what was the worst what was the worst thing that you had, the best thing that you had?
So I think my thing is like, so I would say generally speaking, I'm not super picky with food.
Sure.
I just try to eat what I'm given and be grateful for it. Try not to have too much food waste.
Yeah.
I think the thing for me is like, it's actually just too much of the same rather than one thing being bad.
I see.
So it's like, too much fried noodles.
Gross.
It's a little too greasy, basically, to have that as often as they give it to us. And there's usually a protein of some kind. And I would say, I think it's most, for me anyway, because I don't eat beef.
Yeah.
They give me chicken or fish usually.
Sure.
Unfortunately, the fish is usually, like frozen fish that has been fried.
Oh yeah.
Which is not great when it's cold because usually, like it's delivered in bulk, right? So even if it's warm, it's not crispy anymore. So it's not very, I would say the fish is probably the thing that you want to avoid. The fish is not very good. But the chicken is usually perfectly fine and sometimes quite tasty, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you didn't order in some fancy stuff? You didn't get like a Hai Di Lao ordered in?
No. I mean, there were a couple of days where I was feeling a little bit more like desperate. So I did order in some Vietnamese pho. But the thing is, like, I don't actually want to waste food. So I've been trying my best to eat what is given. Yeah, just smaller quantities, I think. I don't eat everything that is given, but at least I try not to waste it.
Right. And you don't get you don't get to leave. You get to leave your room, I guess, for like a walk around the yard.
No.
Like in prison where you get like 30 minutes out. No.
No, you're not allowed to leave at all. So I haven't left the room really in almost 2 weeks now.
Oh no.
So I've been trying to do exercise in the room. So doing yoga, squats and lunges and all that kind of stuff. But it is difficult to try to really do a lot of exercise in a hotel room.
Do they give you any do they check in with you? Do they give you any wellness checks? Are they concerned that you're going stir crazy? I don't know.
I don't think they care if I'm going stir crazy, but they do give me a call every day. Like
they give you a call every day?
Yeah, they give you a call every day, and I think it's to check in to see if you're ill or not.
Oh,
so they
like,
ask how are you,
specifically your temperature.
So they check in with you every day, and then while they're doing that sort of general "are you feeling ill" call, they'll ask if you need anything. So like if you need extra towels or whatever, they can send those up.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I mean, this is unusual. I mean, this is an unusual experience. Hopefully, a once in a lifetime experience that you wouldn't have to go through again. But it is an unusual experience having gone through that.
Yeah. And I would say to everybody that it's amazing how you can waste time.
Really?
So obviously there are moments when I'm in the room and I am kind of stir crazy or like I wish I could be doing something else.
Yeah.
But between actually I am working from the hotel room. So between work and the internet and talking to friends via Zoom or whatever, it does actually eat up hours. It's kind of amazing how time disappears.
Yeah. Did you pick up any new hobbies? Like Farmville?
In 2 weeks? No.
I don't know.
It's only 2 weeks.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just dramatizing. I'm sure it's actually not as dramatic as I can imagine it is.
I think for how to say A-type ADHD individuals, it might be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah.
I think for me, the main issue that I've had is there's no cleaning supplies.
Wait,
so
what?
I'm generally a very neat person.
Oh.
So I wish I could mop the floor or
Wait,
something.
they don't clean your room?
No, not for 2 weeks. Nobody comes into your room for 2
weeks.
Wait,
where does the trash go? Where's the trash?
So you can leave it outside your door. No, you leave it
okay.
outside your door. But there's there's not a vacuum.
What if you spill something?
They supposedly give you a cleaning cloth and you can,
That's not enough. What if you spill your wine? Okay, do you get wine? I guess you could order wine.
You can order wine, but I don't
What if you
wine.
spill some wine on your bed? What are you going to do?
Well, they'll give you new sheets.
And you put it on yourself? Oh, God.
Yes, you put it on yourself. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right. Not cleaning. What about your laundry?
It's the same. You can send it out.
Oh, you can send it out. Okay.
Yeah, you can send it out.
You can't clean anything.
But basically, if it's just it depends on your average level of cleanliness. I think I'm a little bit cleaner than average potentially. So I'm just I wish I could just give this floor a once over,
I I suppose you could order a mop in and mop away.
I mean, I could order from Deliveroo or whatever, the supermarket.
Like a Red Mart, like a
yeah, a Red Mart delivery.
I mean, what else are you gonna do?
Yeah. No, actually, I was very grateful because one of our mutual friends, I asked her, she was bringing by some stuff anyway, so she brought me some sponges and dishwashing soap.
Oh,
I
didn't know you could bring stuff from somebody else. Oh.
Yeah, so it's left for you at concierge, and then the hotel staff bring it up to you. So.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And where are you staying again?
I'm at the Capitol.
Oh, the Kempinski. Oh, the fancy one.
Yeah. So it is a very nice room. It's just no matter how nice a room, it is still a small room for for 15 days. Yeah.
Wow. Very interesting.
So I would say, luckily I got the call this morning from the lab. I'm COVID negative, so that's great. I wasn't infected on my journey, and I can.
And this is the first
Sunday.
time you've been tested, right? So this is nice to just know that you haven't been carrying around any.
Yeah, but obviously, I mean, I think the test that they did probably is a molecular test.
Okay.
So it might just it's about active.
Yeah.
Virus. So the fact that I don't have virus right now does not necessarily mean I did not have it in the past and was just asymptomatic.
So I guess this is a good time to maybe kind of share a little bit about the different kinds of tests, what they mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's two main kinds of tests.
Yeah.
There's an antibody test and then there's an antigen test. So antibody test is basically antibodies are created in response to a threat in the body. So it's basically your immune system reacting to a problem and creating antibodies. Right. So when you do an antibody test, you're testing for a reaction, basically. Whereas an antigen test, you're testing for the thing itself, the bug itself, the virus itself, or the whatever. So antigen test, if you take one of those, it tells you if you have active infection because it's testing if that bug is actually in your body, right? It has to exist for it to be picked up by the test.
Right.
But an antibody test, once you've had an infection, the antibodies are still within your system.
That's right.
And there's a few different kinds of antibodies. So some of them will disappear after a while.
Right.
Some of them have memory, and so your body will always have them in your body. That's how you achieve some level of immunity.
Right.
So those you can show up to be positive on an antibody test, but you may have had an infection 5 months ago, and you are not actively infectious now.
Okay.
So it's kind of descriptive of what has happened.
Yeah.
But not descriptive of if you're infectious or not.
Right. I see. And so you took an antigen test.
I'm pretty sure this is an antigen test.
You're pretty sure it's an antigen test. And would that be because it was a nasal pharyngeal swab versus a saliva sample? Like, what's the difference?
No, I think it just has to do with why do you use one test versus another test.
Okay.
So a lot of the antigen tests tend to be more expensive than an antibody test.
I see. Okay.
So antigen tests, especially in this context where somebody who has flown in from abroad, you are more worried that they're bringing something in than your general population.
Yeah.
And because your general population right now has very low numbers, right?
Right.
So if you had to allocate resource, you'd be like, okay, let's go for a test that has high sensitivity and specificity for my at-risk population, right? So that they don't get into general population.
Right.
So a lot of the let's say high sensitivity, high specificity tests are what we call molecular tests. So molecular tests, it uses a method called they use an amplification-based method.
Right.
So amplification-based method means they'll take from the body. So they take a sample, like a blood sample, a nasopharyngeal sample, something like that, and they'll add some reagents to it. And one of the things that happens with these mixture of chemicals is that, let's say you have only one copy, so one virus in that sample of blood, right? So one SARS sample, virus in that entire sample of blood. Using a molecular test, you actually can amplify the number of viruses that is in that blood. So you copy their DNA so that it's easier to detect. Because no matter how sensitive your detection method is, usually finding one strand of DNA in a sample of any kind is very difficult. Okay. So what these molecular methods do is they amplify. So that means they replicate the number, the DNA is in there, so it's easier to detect.
Right.
And that's why they can be so sensitive.
Right.
Right. So if you're worried about somebody potentially infecting a lot of people because they're at risk, you use this kind of test because it's basically the most sensitive test you can use.
Right.
Okay. But the challenge with these tests is they're complicated. You need specialty equipment, and usually, the cost of the test is higher.
Sure.
Right? So essentially what that means is this becomes a precious resource.
Right.
Right. You wouldn't use this for just screening in general population, because frankly you wouldn't have enough reagents for the most part to do the entire population.
I see. Okay.
So that's why when you're trying to do a rapid test, or you're trying to screen large numbers of people, a lot of times you end up doing a antibody test instead.
I see. Okay.
Because antibody tests commonly can be developed into lateral flow test strips. So basically like pregnancy test strips,
Yeah. So it's a point of care kind of delivery, as in you can do it in the field.
Yeah, you can do it in the field. And usually they're much cheaper. So because lateral flow technology has been around for a very long time.
That's right.
You can do what we call roll-to-roll manufacture. So you basically can print these tests.
That's right.
And you can manufacture them at millions, per factory.
Right.
So it's much more viable than running a laboratory tests with lots of complicated reagents, needing probably a technician or a PhD level individual to run these tests. Right. So when you're in a sort of mass screening kind of scenario, what you end up doing is you do an antibody test. So you can just catch anybody that has it, basically.
Ever.
And then after that, you say, okay, this is the population that has it.
Right.
Now let's figure out who actually has an active infection.
Right. Okay. Right? Got it.
So I know that they're trying to develop basically antigen test on a lateral flow platform, which means then but the thing is, it's still not going to be as sensitive as a molecular diagnostic, because
for sure there's no amplification.
A lateral flow test, there's no amplification.
Right.
So that person needs to be highly infective, basically shedding lots of virus, has lots of virus in their blood or in their sputum.
Yeah.
In order to show up on a lateral flow test.
Right.
Okay. So this is the thing where, you have trade-offs with every kind of test methodology. And actually there's actually a lot more detail. So I categorize all molecular tests under one giant category, but that even inside there is lots of subsegments and lots of differences in the techniques that you could use.
And how does the sampling method kind of factor into this? Because I think people have you heard a lot of stories about people doing the nasopharyngeal and it being like so unbearably painful and just generally uncomfortable, and not sure whether you did it yourself or it was administered by some kind of a trained technician or a staff versus say a saliva sample or something that's less uncomfortable. So how does that factor into it?
It has to do with basically the the value of that sample. So the thing is like you could, so how to say, you can do blood tests, right? Because it's going to be floating around in there.
Yeah.
That's one way. But then you need somebody to be able to draw blood.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So you need a phlebotomist. So that's a specially trained nurse who can do the blood draw.
Yeah.
On top of that, you generate a lot of hazardous waste because you need needles and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's like in a environment where you're very worried about infectivity, you try to generate as little medical waste as possible, basically biohazard, right?
Yeah.
Fine, but that is a way that you can, that is a sample, like perfectly valid sample method.
Yeah.
For this, the argument between sputum and nasopharyngeal has to do with the quality of that sample. So the main thing is you want to get a sample where the disease exists.
Yeah.
Okay. In the earlier, stages, you may not be coughing a lot. You may not actually be, the disease may not be everywhere. But because this is a respiratory spread illness, one of the likelihoods is that it's going to be in the back of your nose, mouth, throat kind of area, incubating there, if anywhere else. So that's one of the reasons that's just a relevant sample to get for these kind of diseases, because that's just where the disease tends to like to domicile, like that's where they want to stay. Okay, so you go to where the virus happens to be.
Right.
Okay. So why not saliva? I mean, it's connected, right? Your mouth, the whole sinus passage to your mouth, it's all connected. So why wouldn't you use saliva? Saliva in industry speak is what we call a dirty sample.
Sure.
Because it is
food.
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of other stuff that is in there. If you smoke, right? So there's a lot of stuff that, and especially if you're doing a sensitive test, for example, like a molecular test.
Yes.
Those tests have to be calibrated properly in order for it to be useful, to be sensitive.
Yeah.
So if you just, drank a bunch of orange juice and now your saliva is acidic, you can throw off the test. Or if you've been smoking a lot, so that the development overhead on creating a test is robust enough to sort of take into account all the potential things you could have been eating and cause cross-contamination or reactivity, whatever, becomes more difficult. So if you're trying to develop a test quickly and create a test that is robust, i.e. it will work for everybody, right? Not just people who have just been drinking water all day.
Right.
Then you pick a sample that is moderately clean. Right? It doesn't have other things in there. The other thing with sputum that is also kind of gross to think about, but very important, is viscosity. Right? There's a huge amount of difference in viscosity
because of your hydration level.
Yeah, and so that's like exactly depending on hydration level,
concentration.
Concentration of the amount of disease per volume of saliva will be different.
Right.
And so then your sensitivity will get impacted depending on the person who comes in. How does somebody take a saliva sample? So, you spit in the tube. Do you take the top of the tube or the bottom of the tube? Which, what makes most sense? So if you're trying to develop a test quickly, a lot of times you try to avoid saliva because frankly, you need to just, test your methodology for so many things to make sure that it doesn't impact your sensitivity or specificity.
Right. Okay. So
especially
you're not aware that there might be anything that people are working on for a saliva based.
Oh yeah, there's definitely people working on that. It's just like how prevalent is it going to be, right? And how robust is it going to be compared to other gold standard methods?
Okay.
So I mean that's the thing. There's like, FDA has published, because they allowed so many what they call emergency use authorization. So things that haven't gone through the standard regulatory process but are let out into the world because of immediate emergency need, basically. So there's I think like almost 60 tests just on the FDA website that has been gone through what they call a review.
Mm.
So they, say sensitivity, specificity, all that kind of stuff. And you'll see there will be differences in those numbers. Some will be in the low 90s, some will be in the high 90s, and some of them will be completely terrible. You probably should stop using them, right? So this is the thing where at some stages of a pandemic, certain tests, because of pressing need, will be allowed.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
Because you have sort of urgency in being able to do certain tests. But in different stages of the pandemic, you may say, I can't allow those tests anymore. It's not justifiable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for things where you want to know that you are accurate, you probably still end up doing nasopharyngeal swabs rather than saliva swabs, because it's still likely, even if it's by a few percentage difference.
Sure.
In the short term anyway, it's still likely to be more sensitive and specific than a saliva test.
Right. And do you want to get into, I guess, the issue of false positives and false negatives with the current standard of testing, and what that means right now?
Yeah, so it's, how to say, no test is ever 100% sensitive or specific.
For sure. Right.
Okay, so let's just get that out of the way, right?
Yeah.
The way a lot of things are justified is on the basis of statistics, basically.
Yeah.
Right? What is justifiable or not at different stages of a situation. So, for example, in like HIV, right? With modern standards, and now the fact that it's still a problem. Obviously, it's still very infectious, but let's say it's not like an emergency situation.
Yeah.
The way that they do HIV testing is that you always need to have a confirmatory test.
Yeah.
So you do one test, you may be positive, then you have to do another test. It has to come back positive before you tell the person that they are positive. Right? And usually the second test is actually a more sensitive test than the first test.
Right.
So the first test can be like a lateral flow test, and then the second test, a lot of times they'll run a molecular diagnostic on it, basically, to make sure it is true, right? And what that means is by the time you multiply out the probabilities, the chances of it being a false positive or false negative will be like a 1 in a million chance.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So that's how you do it when you have time and resource, and it's a well understood problem.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a very dangerous disease. So you absolutely want to have the answer correct.
Right.
Now, coronavirus is dangerous, but it doesn't affect everybody the same way.
Right.
Right. There are lots of people who will get it and will be perfectly fine. There are lots of people who will get it and will be completely asymptomatic.
Sure.
So the challenge is to, at least in the early stages of the pandemic, they were trying to track and trace to try to limit the infection.
Yeah.
Now, for a lot of countries, that's basically impossible. You look at the United States, you look at Europe, they're not doing track and trace anymore.
Sure.
All they're trying to do is manage the numbers in such a way that the hospitals are not overwhelmed.
Right.
ICUs are not overwhelmed.
Right.
They have enough staff, enough equipment, enough medication for the people who are seriously ill. Okay? So in that context, if you get a false negative, right? So you are actually, you actually have COVID, but they tell you that you don't have COVID.
Yeah.
It won't be usually it's not going to be an isolated diagnosis, so to speak. So they usually, when these things happen, is if you are showing symptoms of COVID, and you get a negative response, but the doctors are pretty sure they'll test you again, basically, and they'll likely use a more sensitive method to make sure that it is not. But if you are completely asymptomatic and you are a false negative, in some ways you're fine, right? Because you're not at risk for dying.
I can't remember what's the latest literature on spread on spread with asymptomatic carriers. I was very confused
Yeah.
at a certain point. But isn't it okay? So I guess maybe this sounds a bit strange. But and also maybe you wanna clarify what's false positive and what's false negative for a general listener. But let's say false positive being that you don't have it actually, but it's been detected, the test comes back that it's positive, so you have a light shined upon you, you're isolated, you're given the opportunity to double check that that the first result was correct by having a second test. But I guess from a border safety perspective, I don't know how else to describe it, someone coming from overseas having a false negative in that they do have it, but they don't, but the test comes back negative, but then they're let out into the population.
Yeah.
So what's the risk associated?
But this is the thing.
Yeah.
They're still quarantining us for 15 days.
Okay, that's true. Okay, you're right. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And you are at peak infectivity, I think around day 4 or 5 or something like that. Right, in the time scale. So you will be, if not infected at all, you know, by the end of that 15 days, i.e. you have already resolved COVID, you're no longer infectious.
Right.
Or if you are still lingering, you're likely to have some symptoms.
Yeah.
Right? And then you probably have to do another test.
But I guess the conversations now though with green lanes and so on are people coming in, getting a swab and then going about their business without quarantine.
Yes. So then you're playing, basically you are playing a game with statistics. What's the likelihood that the people who come in will have it, on top of the likelihood that they're going to be a false negative?
Yeah.
Right? Like you're multiplying, you're playing those games on a population level to see how much risk as a society you're willing to tolerate.
Yeah.
Right? And again, this is a bit self-selected. Right? If I was 80 years old and had some immunocompromised situation going on, I would not be traveling at this point in time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I am youngish, right? I am female. I am not obese. You know, I don't have cardiovascular problems. I don't have. So I'm like, okay, I need to come back for various reasons. Let's come back.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll take the risk. Because the chances are, if I get it, I won't get seriously ill.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that where you look at it and you say, okay, people who are coming in and out of countries trying to do business, hopefully they have the sense to not be immunocompromised and then trying to travel all the places, right? You probably should have some sense to not do that if you are at risk. But yeah, it is a game because obviously economically, you can die from bad economics just as easily as you die from
you can
COVID,
always be unlucky, basically. You can be the short end of the statistical stick.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things where, you know, countries right now are really trying to balance the benefits to improving economic status versus, you know, how many people are going to die. And it's not unprecedented because we play this game every year with flu. Okay, a lot of people die with flu. I think you forget just how bad flu is. Flu is really bad. And this is one of the funny things because we say to each other, you know, like in the conversation, oh, I can't go to work today, I have the flu. A lot of times that's not the flu, okay? If you have the flu, you're usually down for 2 weeks, okay? What you have is probably a cold or some sinusitis, okay?
Just a little hungover.
So flu is actually really bad, but every year we allow a certain amount of the population to die rather than shutting down the entire economy to keep flu at bay. Right. So games to do with sort of population health, the risk reward of opening those green lanes, they all have to be taken into consideration. But again, if you have two countries that are mostly in the single digits or very low double digits of cases a day, if you have very similar rates, right, between the two countries, then you're not necessarily increasing the chance of any given individual getting, you know, becoming a super spreader event, basically.
Right.
Because statistically, it's the same.
Yeah.
You have as much chance of catching it in that country as this country.
Yeah.
So, fine. So that's unfortunately the truth of it. You're never going to be 100% safe.
Yeah.
It is dependent on your risk tolerance.
Yeah.
So the way that I think about it is I don't trust that somebody else is going to keep me safe.
Sure.
You have to do things to keep yourself safe. So if you are worried, wear that mask, have good hand hygiene, do all the things that you need to do to basically lower your chances of getting it. Don't assume that somebody else, by their behavior, is going to make sure that you are safe.
Right. But actually, I guess this I mean, the way that you're reflecting it, that I guess governments or society or something large, at aggregate level, are making these decisions on what's the risk level that we're willing to accept for flu on a regular basis. And maybe this is a very large conversation. I feel it's a very large conversation. But then it's kind of like why does, in a democratic society, and okay, so now I'm gonna sound like a crazy person. I sound like a anti-vaxxer or something. In a democratic society, why is the government the person that makes a decision about what is the risk level that the nation is willing to take? Why doesn't the population get a vote?
I think that's partially has to do with your public health system, right? Because no matter what, people are going to get angry if somebody important in their life dies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if that happens too often, then large portions of the population are going to be very, very angry at government for allowing it to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that context, especially with a population, so like if you have some kind of national health system, your goal is trying to manage that budget. Okay. So you look at the UK, you look at Australia, you look at a lot of European countries, and to a certain extent, Singapore as well. So it is more capitalistic here, but there's some baseline level of the government trying to take care of disease, in the country, right? That's paid out by tax dollars, basically, right? One way or the other, it's coming from you. So you should have a say. But here's the thing. If you don't put some policies in place to reduce the disease burden, there is not going to be enough resource in that pot of money to go around.
Right.
Okay. And when that happens, when you have too many people for too few hospitals, for too few drugs, a lot more people die than they have to. Okay. So these whole let's try to take precautions so we don't have a run on our public health system is basically just trying to do that. And it is in some ways self-serving because at the end of the day, governments don't like to be overthrown. Okay. If a lot of your population dies because of something you could have prevented, trust me, you're not going to be in power for very long. So
who knows after November? Oh, when is it? I can't remember.
So obviously the numbers are for the US is some of the worst in the world, especially considering their GDP per capita.
Absolutely.
But it's still, I know this is going to sound cruel, but it is still 200,000.
Not so bad.
200,000 is, there are many other things that kill more than 200,000 people a year in the US. So yes, it definitely could be a better situation over there. It is very, very unfortunate that it disproportionately affects basically lower income and therefore minority populations. And that is the mismanagement, because it definitely points the finger that if you managed those better, you would have much better outcome, because certain parts of your population is having very good outcome.
Right. What a heavy subject. What a heavy conversation.
That was QALYfied, the podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave a positive review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever good podcasts are found, and recommend QALYfied to a friend.